you've been victim of this, and another place because you've been a victim of a different type of violence.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you. Nicole Jacobs, can I take your view on this, please?
I agree very much with what Sophia said. I think some people might be surprised. They think the domestic abuse commissioner, wouldn't I prefer my own or a domestic abuse strategy? And I just think that the trouble with it is there's so much overlap. Anyone who works in this for any length of time will know there's links between, very quickly, sexual violence, stalking and harassment. There's all sorts of links, interconnections between these issues. So if it is going to be the case, which it seems that it's very much the intention of government to set out two strategies, they must be integrated. I have trouble visualizing really how it looks because of those overlaps. There would be a lot of replication, for example, within the strategies. I've heard ministers argue the point that this gives greater weight to respective issues because there would be kind of a separation out. I understand that too, but I think that we have to really look carefully at the strategy, which is of course running, is being developed now. We should be seeing it, I think, relatively soon. And I suppose, one of the things that I would be looking for in it, which has been committed by government, is to make sure that we see a huge amount of integration between the two strategies, a recognition of all victims of abuse. So for me as the domestic abuse commissioner, it's very important we recognize, male victims of abuse as well, and all victims of abuse. But we have to also, and the government has committed to this, that we should also recognize how highly gendered these abuses are. I won't rehearse all the statistics, because I'm sure you will know them. So I think we have to retain those principles within the strategy and not lose sight of those things, or the strategies. And I also would just say how much we need that oversight in the interministerial group and the cross-government commitment to really drive a coordinated response. One of the things we've talked a lot about because of the problems within the criminal justice system today, those are all true, but we also really have to recognize that most victims or survivors of abuse will not initially approach the criminal justice agencies. They'll be looking to health visitors, teachers, social workers, people within their community who they trust. And so we need to see a huge amount in these strategies or strategy that shows that commitment across government. And also, one of the things that is really important is the modeling down to the local level. So police and crime commissioners, local authorities and their community safety partnerships and their safeguarding partnerships all will be looking at that national strategy. Obviously, it's a different setup in Wales, which I'm sure Yasmin can speak to, but I do think we have to understand from our recent research, which shows that although domestic abuse, for example, is a priority at the local level, is a stated priority, half of local authorities surveys didn't have an active strategic partnership or strategy that had been recently refreshed. So we need to recognize that what happens nationally will affect very much at the local level, and we need to see a much closer management across departments, but also a more supportive, clarity for local governance, which is where most of the commissioning happens. Most of this coordinated community response that we're really advocating is being implemented, and we need to really help support local strategic partnerships to prioritize and really have the best information and the best insight into their own strategies at the local level. And I think having these debates just, it doesn't engender a really coherent view as that trickles down and out and around into other work.
Okay, thank you for that. Yasmin Khan, interested in your view from Wales. Obviously, your title straddles both of these areas, so I'm interested what your approach is and your view.
Yeah, our approach in Wales has been welcomed, I think, by the sector by having one national strategy, thereby giving the authorities that are there to protect local authorities, safeguarding and the policing, a much clearer understanding of what that means for them and how they protect victims, not only who have experienced abuse, but also are at risk of. I've also been involved in some of the Home Office consultations around, the separate strategies. And I think it's very clear to say, and it's been echoed many times with the other speakers, is that there is a real desire from the specialist providers and survivors that this two approach is misleading. It convolutes some of the areas specifically around forced marriage and honour-based abuse, and it dilutes those specific complexities around forms of violence. So our experience in Wales has been one of very clear, a coherent strategy, which is implemented by public services and widely understood, and thereby providing a clearer approach and a pathway for victims who are at risk of violence. And I think we have to listen to what the survivors and experts are telling us. And although it has been referred to having two bites of the cherry, that's not how the sector view it based on the experience of survivors. We need clearer guidance. And by having clearer guidance, one strategy provides that guidance and that reference point. And I think this two approach is not the right way to go down it.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Last but not least, Claire, what's your view from victims' perspective?
Yeah, well, from the sector and from victims and survivors' perspective, it's to retreat from a joined up approach and a sort of one strategy really will take us backwards, and that's the concern, because obviously violence against women and girls, most of it is interrelated. We see, as Nicole has already said, in domestic abuse cases, we will see stalking, we will see sexual violence. So I don't really understand how we can split it out. And I think it'll have an impact on the policy and also support services and how they're being delivered. And what worries me is, as I've talked about earlier, we need to be looking at recognizing all forms of violence and how they are joined up and the impact and the risks to the victim. And I think if we separate that out, we won't pick up those risks. And I think we will leave women and girls at greater risk if we don't have one strategy. And that's felt very much across from the sector and from survivors and victims that I hear directly from. So I think it's really important that we look at what Wales is doing and having this one strategy to really ensure that we are protecting all victims and survivors and looking at all the interrelated forms of different violence.
Thank you. Well, that's a very clear steer from our panel there.
Thank
so
you.
Very much appreciated. Back to you, Chair.
Thank you. Andrew Gwynn.